Good morning, everyone. John471 here to discuss the S&P 500. Today is April 21st, 2025, Monday. Allow me to read our disclaimer. Derivatives trading is not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results. What do we have today for the news? Not very much at all. It's Easter Monday. Yesterday was the Easter holiday observed by many human beings. And today we have really not much at all on the calendar. We have a Treasury buyback announcement noted here on the CT calendar. As well, we have leading indicators at 10 a.m., which is like a third tier number. And Austin Goolsbee is speaking at 8:30. So not very much at all scheduled today. Taking a look at our charts, this is the S&P 500 daily bars, RTH only. And what we can see here as we begin another week, we notice that this prior week was an inside week, and it was also just a 4-day week because of the holiday. So an inside week. What else can we gather from what we see here? Well, putting the daily profiles on, one of the things that I've really been talking about, we have this day right here. This wide-ranging rally day that took us out of this mess we were in back here. And it was news-driven, but we rallied. We retraced down to the 5146s. And so, as far as RTH is concerned, we have taken out this 5520 high just barely in the overnight session, but we've really been trading the range from 5520 down to 5146. And as you can see, we pulled back, we pushed higher. We hung out here for 2 days and made sort of postured as if we were going to push for the high and get into this gap zone. But instead we were unable, and it all just fell apart and left another gap zone here. So looking at this weekly profile, the profile we put in last week gives us a very clear double distribution. Let's zoom in just a bit. So we were left with a very clear double distribution in the prior week's profile with the gap zone from 416 as a pretty nice over-under line for the week. As I mentioned last week, being trapped here between 5520 and then we have this low at 5146. What I kind of had mentioned is if we don't get this high and we fall back into this this balance area, that if we continue to revert lower, this 5146 low and the remaining single prints we have right here are a viable target. And so if we fall out of the prior week's range and continue, which we have pushed this prior week's range overnight, this is the ultimate target, this unauctioned area, if we start to continue to fall here with a notable speed bump right here at Century. On, excuse me. On the other hand, if we were able to instead recover the prior week's range, prior day's range, we have some pretty clear targets with yesterday's low, the auction areas left, value low, VPOC, and the high. If we're able to revert and hold this area. I will note, however, that for me, let's see if we can just take a look at this. The way that this day, which is our Friday, the way that it's kind of reasonably balanced, took out the single prints which were left right here and made a pretty good attempt. This area, if we push back into this, I would be looking at this as resistance initially. We'll discuss that. Let's go to a smaller time frame chart and discuss specific price action. Okay, here we are on an intraday chart. This is a 2-point by 4 PNF. Here we see the profile I was mentioning from last Thursday right here with the prior day Wednesday here, low here, which is our prior week's low. And what we can see is we sort of opened, we left a gap to the prior week's settle. We have not tested the prior week's settle. We just started to explore prices lower. And as you can see, we have taken the prior week's low. So that's what's happening right now. The profile is fairly toothy. There's not a ton of volume, not as much as we've been seeing. So, and we also notice here there was a bit of an attempt to hold, meaning that we just kind of like opened the initial action on the open was selling. The bid that the sellers were able to find was right here, and briefly until it traded out, it kind of held here, and now you see it has that bid has traded, and now we're exploring prices lower, not yet finding buyers from what it looks like. So what are we expecting today? We'll go over bearish ideas first because the stance for me is pretty bearish, having taken the prior week's low, and being unable to retest the prior settle. So as I've noted, this area is very key. This is a key area, which is right around the 75s, DGPs. We also have the prior week's low. So I'm going to go over, so the most bearish idea for continuation would be if we open, it's not yet 8 o'clock now, but the most bearish idea would be if we open and the prior week's range is just off limits. Meaning, who knows where we open, we have some time, but maybe we explore price a bit lower. But the key would be for this idea is if the prior week's low is just resistance and we can't even get into that area during RTH, then I'm obviously looking for lower prices. The first key target would be the century figure in this event. Let's also just quickly go over that. Go over if it doesn't start from here, if we get a pullback. So that would be the most bullish idea would be if we open and we just don't even get back into the prior week's range. But if we get a pullback, the key area for me would be here, which would be kind of a different situation. If we end up kind of finding some buyers and reverting higher ahead of the open, then this 5570 area would be the key region where this is where buyers previously attempted to hold and sellers overwhelmed. So for me, that's an area of interest. If we start to retrace, that would be the area where a structured short could be interesting to get back to the prior week's low and take the overnight low. So this would be the key area for sellers to hold if we get a reversion, in my opinion. And the key target would then be we'd have a target at the prior week's low and the overnight low. So this would be the sort of action I would expect if we do get some kind of a pullback. I would expect this 75s area to be the important area to either be tested or fail to be tested ahead of continuation. Then as I was saying, if we get continuation, however it happens, if we get the pullback or if we just go from the prior week's low, the key, either way, the key to go for short targets for me would be if we get the short up here, then we can target the prior week's low. But if it stays down here, if we don't get the reversion ahead of the open and we start to extend from here and we see that the prior week's low is actually where the sellers have came down to, then the first key target beyond the overnight low, wherever that is at that time, would be the century figure. I would expect some turbulence around the century figure. That would be my primary expectation. But if buyers are unable to force reversion, then I would be open for continued exploration lower. And the key target would be obviously the single prints. Maybe we get there today, maybe we don't. But if sellers are still motivated below the prior week's low, we'll look at century. And then if sellers remain motivated below century, these singles are the obvious target. So that pretty much covers our short ideas. If it's a very aggressive short where we just can't even get into the prior week's range, then we're looking at century as our initial target. If we get a pullback, then I'm interested in this area and I would be looking to target or scale at the prior week's low and then potentially get continuation. Below century, singles are the key target. Excuse me. Okay, let's go over our bullish ideas. So for me, bullish ideas, there's no, if we get a deep reversion into, say, century or this area, and we get a nice structured pullback that shows us that the buyers or sellers are done and buyers are picking up, then we could have a reversion short. But if we're talking about just seeing bullish biases from where we are now, the key area again for me would be the prior week's low. I would, potentially we could see a little bit more of an exploration lower, but ahead of the open, if the buyers are interested and they like these prices, I would expect to see us get back into the prior week's range. This could happen this morning after, the RTH open. It could happen pre-open, whatever. But the key is we're testing prices below the prior week's low. And for me to want to get long, I need to see this test fail, meaning I want to see us fail to hold below this. I want to see price act like a beach ball being held underwater and just get to the surface and get back above the prior week's low. Really, I'd like to see it with an impulse, like ideally some attempt, we're trying, and then boom, everybody just says no. Impulse back into range, pull back, ideally hold this area, and then the first target that we'd be looking for on reversion is, guess what, this same exact place, because this is the area that for me is ripe to be tested if we get back into the prior week's range. Now, as I kind of went over before, this is easily the place where the sellers could reassert themselves and just ruin the buyer's party and impulse us back below the prior week's low and see us start to trade that scenario. That's obviously possible. But this is a bullish idea, so we're exploring that. And what would happen if the buyers have more juice? We'd probably see us push up into this area, maybe try one more attempt lower, but probably start to see some higher lows and see price able to push through and take this area of structure. If we take this area of structure, like we get into it, we pull back, we can't get back to the low, and we start working higher, where are we looking for? Obviously, we're looking for the overnight high and the prior week settle, which would be the absolute key target for reversion if we start to get up there. Now, I will note there is a very distinct possibility we get the whole way up there. We do that whole thing, and then we get right to here, and the sellers revert, in which case I would start to look at this as a potential nothing day. It might just chop around with the VPOC, the prior day's VPOC as resistance. That would be a nothing day. But what we would need to be aware of if we get back above, if we get back into the get into the overnight high and we're holding the 75s, we get into the prior week settle, this is going to be the key area, the Thursday VPOC. Excuse me. If we're able to push above the Thursday VPOC and we're able to keep exploring prices, really this whole value area of Thursday with the prior week settle as kind of the lower bounds, if we can get into this area and expand rotations, then I'm looking for price discovery higher. And I would look for the high of Thursday. And the ultimate target would obviously be the gap zone, but who knows if we could get there today. We could, maybe later this week. But the key that I'm saying here is for any bullish ideas that start with reversion, first we need to get past the 75. So we can get past the 75s, and we're looking for the overnight high and the prior week settle. If we get into the prior week settle and the overnight high, then we have all of Thursday's value area, which is resistance in my opinion. But if we see rotations expand higher and participation get drawn in this resistance, then I would be up for seeing stops go off and seeing the reversion happen. But we'd have to get through this area. If we get through this area, then it's price discovery higher. I'm going zone to zone. Ultimate target is this gap zone, which would be a very significant change. But anyway, that's what I got for you today, just to tie a bow on it and give you the Cliffs Note version. If we fall below, if we continue below the prior week's low and keep making hay, then we're looking for Century and potentially even the gap zone. If we revert, then we're looking for this area of structure, and that's going to be our question mark to see what happens here. Do we revert or do we fight through? If we fight through, then we know that we're probably going to take the overnight high and the prior week settle, and then the question mark becomes, do we get through this area? This is where any rally could fall apart, right in here. But if we fight through it, then for me, I would consider the bulls to have won the day, and I will be looking for zone-to-zone action and an eventual target of the gap zone, which may not happen today. We might not get very much extension towards either of these targets today, just based on it being Monday, right after the holiday, might be slower, might not get that action, but these are the targets that I'm looking for. All right, I'm starting to run long, so I'm going to wrap this up. Hopefully this is complete. I think the way the auction is kind of arranged today, we have some pretty clear clear targets and clear areas of structure to gauge what we want to do based on. So hopefully we get the price action that we're looking for to be able to do something something beneficial for us today. But anyway, that's what I got. I'm going to wrap it up here. I hope you're having a wonderful morning. I hope your wonderful morning continues. And I hope you find some way to improve your trading today that is not dependent upon your P&L. That's what I got for you. Ciao.